My name is Eliezer. Thank you so much. I feel like it's such an honor and privilege to be able to share. And thank you, Daniel and Jess, for reaching out and asking me. Because I think when Daniel asked me, "Hey, do you want to preach in Central?" To be honest, I wanted to say no initially because I was a bit like I'm kind of nervous. I feel like I'm kind of nervous. It's been a while since I've been here, and as they mentioned before, I've been living in Finland for the last 10 months. And it's a bit of a random place. You might be wondering, okay, how on earth did you end up in Finland? It's a long story. We can maybe chat after the service. But long story short, it was in 2019 that actually, I don't know if I got a slide. Oh, hello from Finland. So in 2019, I think Flip, look at that. You guys have just leveled up and everything. This is amazing. In 2019, an opportunity came for me to, serve outside of London. And I was like, you know what, why not? It was an exciting adventure to a new part of the world that I've never been or never explored before. So I was like, hey, why not? I'm up for the challenge. And ever since, I've been there for the last 10 months and it's been amazing. And I just bring some greetings from Finland. It's a lovely, lovely country. I feel like I was a bit nervous because I was like, I don't know what this country is going to be like, but I think I've accidentally fallen in love with it. And funny enough, I'm actually staying there for another year. So so I'll be there for at least another year. But anyway, so Finland is a church, is like comprised of maybe 40 disciples-ish, give or take. Some coming in and out here and there. So it's a small church, but it's a church that's striving to grow. I think 4 or 5 years ago, Peter and Magdalena, which were actually one of the main reasons I moved there, they moved from Sweden to Finland to kind of help the church, to restart the church, because the church was in a bit of a awkward position because for 20 odd years, like there wasn't any leadership. It's almost like free for all type of thing. And of course, as Christians, that's not how it works. We can't just do what we want. So they went there. They moved there 5 years ago with their whole family from Sweden, and ever since they've been serving there. And I've been privileged to join them and to, just to work with them. But this is our group. This is like a super fun group. I love this group so much. Like I feel like. Yeah, they've made my time there amazing. So, of course, on the far left, that's me, just barely on the screen. But then we have 8 disciples, young youth disciples. So we call it a youth group. We don't really have teens and students and yo-pros. We're not that big. So we just call it the youth group. And the picture on the left, that's just pretty much most of us, except I think there's one person missing. So the brother in the middle, his name is Igor. He's a half Russian, half Ukrainian brother that's been living in Finland nearly as roughly the same amount of time as me. And then we have Tommy and then Seem. Tommy's just the guy right at the back in the shadows. And then Seem is the guy with like a big smile. He's such a lovely guy. I'm trying to get him to come to London to meet all of you. But yeah, I love this group. It's 8 of us, and I think the ratio is perfect. 4 guys, 4 girls. Amazing. So like, reach out to the women's ministry. Don't get any ideas, guys. Don't get any ideas. But yeah, so the picture on the top right is actually, so what we've been working on in the Nordics is that we've been working on the relationship between the Baltic and the Nordic region. So of course we have Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and then on the Baltic side we have Estonia, Latvia, etc. And so we kind of been working on our union and our togetherness, because I think we're comprised of so many different small churches there that I feel like we know we should be working together, making the most of each other's ministry and helping each other and lifting each other up. So earlier on this year, I think it was in April, we had the Estonians come over to Finland, which is like a 2-hour ferry ride from Finland to Estonia. It's quite cheap. It's like 15 euros. It's crazy cheap, I know. So they came to encourage us, and we had a youth-led service, and then that was the picture of all of us together. As you can tell, I'm like in the middle. I'm kind of very hard to miss. Like, you can spot me. But yeah, it was so encouraging just having them over there, encouraging us over the weekend. They came on Saturday morning. We just spent the whole day together, and then we had a youth service on Sunday, and then they left the afternoon. And then at the bottom, that's just a picture of the congregation. We almost doubled in numbers when they came. So that was like, whoa, we have so many people. And then actually on the top left, so that was us in this summer at the Nordic conference. So it's called Ekkere. So every year we have Ekkere where all the different Nordic churches, they come together. This is actually the first time in 4 years since all these churches seen each other. So the kids that were maybe this small were all of a sudden this big. It's kind of crazy. I mean, I don't know. I wasn't there, so that's why I keep hearing from people. So it was such an encouraging time just to see all the Nordic people there together. And I think it boosts our faith so much, being such a small church and knowing that, when we come together to worship this great God, there's just this fire that just ignites in our hearts and in our souls. So it was super, super encouraging to have us there. And that's a picture of our group. That's not actually our entire group. Some people were all over the place, so we just got whoever we could get. And then the picture on the left, the small one, more like to the right, those are actually the two kids that the family I'm staying with. So the little one that's on my neck, his name is Verti. He's 6 years old. He's such a lovely kid. And then the other one, his name is Viljami. So they're kind of helping me at the moment to learn Finnish because it's a very difficult language to learn. So I feel like I can sort of communicate with them on a very basic sort of level with them. And then Verti, man, he's such a character. He's such a character. And then on the right, so that's like a little cycling group that we use to reach out to people. We actually had a few neighbors and a few people come out. So we're really trying to maximize our talent and the things that we have in the church to, better outreach for people. I think, as I mentioned, 20 years without any sort of structure, it's kind of difficult to get back in that groove of actually telling people about God and spreading the good news. So we've been trying to use our talents and our gifts and whatever we can just to try and reach out to people. So we try to do it every Saturday, but it's been a little bit inconsistent over the summer. And then on the left, so we have like all these homeless programs that we typically do, which is so amazing. I feel like it's crazy how they treat homeless people there. I feel like, wow, London needs to learn a lot from Finland. Not the London church, but like London in general as a city is like we just spend pretty much the whole day with the homeless people in the forest, grilling and then cleaning the forest. They love cleaning forest. Like they really take care of their forest back there. We just spend, the day with the homeless people, just being with them and sharing our faith with them and being friends with them. And out of that, I think a lot of strong relationships actually came from this program with people in our church, which actually been so inspiring to my faith, because it almost feels like this is kind of like, I almost envision Jesus doing this with people, like kind of sitting with sinners or sitting with people that maybe the outcasts of society, being with them, getting to know them, not on a patronizing level, but it's more like, no, like we're friends. So I feel like I've been learning a lot since I've been there, and God has definitely been convicting and lifting me up a lot. So I feel like I've been benefiting a lot. And then on the right, finally, that's the last picture. That was at it's called Juhannus celebration. So it's basically like, it's like the beginning of summer. So they love it. They do such crazy celebrations. There's people grilling everywhere. And there's so many nature spots there. So if you want to come to Finland, listen, the door is open. Please come to us. But anyway, so that's Finland for now. I want to get to the message soon. This is not my message. But yeah, I'm very happy to be here, and I feel like Finland is encouraged, and I feel like if you want to come out and encourage us, then you have a home, you have a place to stay. So yeah, lovely. Anyway, getting back to the real stuff, to the more important things. So the title of my sermon today. So I was asked to preach on the idea of people who are devoted to God or devotion to God. I think that's the theme that you guys have been going through. Okay, I don't see. Okay, amen. And then Daniel asked me to preach on essentially the idea of people who are devoted to God. And I came up with this title, Moulded and Remoulded. And like, when I was writing the sermon, I feel like I almost thought about, do you know those like toys that you have as a kid that you can like squish them into something, make them like into little maybe guns or little houses or I don't know. It's like these molding toys that you can just make anything out of. And I feel like a lot of the times what do you call them? Play-Doh. Oh, that's the one. So I felt like even clay as well. So I felt like when I thought about this idea of devotion to God, that was almost like the first thing that comes to my mind. At least what I've been learning over the last 10 months being away is that it's almost this constant molding and remolding of yourself. It's like you are as you are today, and God is happy that you are who you are today, but He still kind of wants to change you every single day. Like each day you kind of get a new idea. Oh, I need to be a bit more serving this. Let me just change my perspective, or let me just reshape this. And I feel like the whole concept of being devoted to God kind of revolves around that. It's kind of, you're molded into something, but then you have to be remolded into something again. There really isn't an end goal. And I thought there was an end goal, particularly during my time at uni. I was trying to achieve the absolute perfection of a human. It's like, oh, he does this, he's church on Sundays, he does all these different things. But then quickly enough, I realized that's not what being devoted to God is. It's not doing things the perfect way or being the perfect role model, but it's, of course, having that willingness to be molded and remolded by God day in and day out. But yeah, anyway, so this sermon, we'll focus on the idea of devotion, people who were devoted to God. And at times, when I think about devotion, what comes to mind is like, what does this word devotion mean, So let me just get my notes here quickly. What does this word devotion mean? What does it look like, to live a life of devotion to God? And perhaps it's something that you might have wrestled with in the past. It's like, I find it quite difficult to figure out whether I'm devoted to God or not. And certainly is something that I have wrestled with in the past. And the definition of it is quite simple. So it's having a strong loyalty, affection, or dedication to something or to someone. And for today's sermon, we'll focus on one character in particular, which, at least for me personally, has totally changed my outlook on my relationship with God. And he changed this idea of what it means to be wholeheartedly and fully devoted to God, trusting in him and his being. I have 2 points today. So the first point is discovering God. So that's my first point. And I feel like, so that's my first point. Anyway, and we'll be reading from the book of Job today. So if you want to turn to Job 1, I think the book of Job is a very interesting book. And I think a lot of the times when we think about it, I think maybe the first thing that sort of comes to mind is the suffering that Job kind of went through, and almost like God not really telling him why. And he's just like, he just suffered for no reason. But I think it's a very interesting book when you study it. God expresses a lot of things that I believe we should definitely learn. So let's turn to Job 1, and we'll begin reading together. We won't go through the whole book. I'll just take you through some highlighted points and things that I thought were quite helpful for me. So Job 1, verse 1, it reads, "In the land of Uz, there lived a man whose name was Job. This was a man blameless, upright. He feared God and shunned evil." And I think that's a pretty sick introduction. Like if someone was giving you that introduction, it's like, this is Daniel. He's like this good-looking guy. Not that you're not, but you are a good-looking guy. He's upright. He's a pretty stand-up guy. He gives to charity. He helps the homeless. I was like, damn, I wish I had this sort of introduction, if I ever die. It's like in my funeral. This is Eliezer lying there, upright guy, blameless. Anyway, I just thought it was a pretty sick introduction to this character. It's like, wow, he's almost like a perfect guy. Anyway, let's carry on reading. Verse 2, he has 7 sons and 3 daughters. Sorry, I forgot about the slides, actually. Yeah, the scripture's up there. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters, and he owned 7,000 sheep and 3,000 camels, 500 yokes of oxen, and 500 donkeys. And he had a large number of servants. He was the greatest man among all the people of the East. His sons used to hold a feast in their homes on their birthdays, and they would invite the 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. Verse 5. When a period of feasting had run its course, Job would make arrangements for them to be purified. Early in the morning, he would sacrifice a burnt offering for each of them, thinking, perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. This was Job's regular custom. I think so far what we learn about this man is he's a pretty great guy. He's not just a good guy, he's a pretty great guy. Described almost as the greatest man among all the people of the East. And he's clearly quite wealthy, And some would say he lacked nothing. He pretty much had everything that he needed. Family, he had money, he had resources. In verse 5, Job was a man who feared God and was devoted to him. He couldn't bear the thought of his children sinning or dishonoring God in any way. Therefore, he made these regular sacrifices to cleanse them, And I think that is kind of going above and beyond, because I feel like kind of being described as blameless, just as yourself, is, oh, he's a pretty good guy. Like, he didn't just rest on that. He's like, no, I need to make sure my children, like, they also are right with God. They also are not sinning against God or dishonoring God. So you can kind of see this respect and this reverence that Job kind of has towards God. And for me, it's like, wow, like I can only think about how my spiritual walk is going, and I feel like I get overwhelmed with that, let alone think about someone else's. I think, he was very thorough in his relationship with God. He probably made sure he didn't miss anything. He tried to cover all the bases. And I think even in the midst of all the riches and all the comforts that he had, Job did not compromise his devotion to God. And I think kind of reading the introduction of it, you kind of think, okay, where's the story going? So we skip down to verse 12 of chapter 1. And this was just an interaction that God and Satan had, where essentially Satan is saying, God is only like this because of all the riches you gave him. And God essentially gives Satan, the freedom to take everything from Job, because he was sure Job wouldn't forsake him. In verse 12, the Lord says to Satan, very well then, everything he has in his power, very well then, everything he has in your power. Sorry, I don't know. Whoa, 1 second. Wait, do I have the slides for that? Oh, no, don't forget that. Then the Lord said to Satan, very well then, everything he has in your power, but on the man himself do not lay a finger. Then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. So for me, in some ways, like, okay, God, this seems a bit unfair on the man that you just described as upright, blameless, righteous. This is a man that ticked everything. He almost going to inflict all this pain on him, And essentially Satan goes and he just runs chaos in his life, as you probably could tell. He took his children, took his animals, it took his properties, took everything from him, and even made him sick. So like in my mind, I'm like, wow, this is pretty rough. And I think I would, when I get to that point, I'll probably start hating God. I'll be like, I haven't done anything wrong. Why have you brought all these things to my life? And I think typically when you speak to people that aren't disciples and they kind of go back to this idea, is God good, is God just, they kind of refer back to the book of Job. It's like, I can never worship a God like that. This God just inflicts all this pain and all this suffering to someone that is blameless and upright, and I'm not even half of that. So let's go down to Job 3. So essentially Job, curses his life. He curses the day he was born, and he wished he was never conceived. Job concluded this chapter as following. So Job 3:23. Why is life given to those with no future? Those God has surrounded with difficulties. I cannot eat for sighing. My groans poured out like water. What I always feared has happened to me. What I dreaded has come true. I have no peace, no quietness. I have no rest. Only trouble comes. I think when you read that, that's like, wow, that is pretty sad. And I think we can almost relate to him in that sense. It's like, yeah, of course you would feel that way. You've just had all these tragedies happen in your life. And then we skip down to Job 6. So if you want to turn your pages to Job 6, after this, his friends, so essentially how in this book of Job it works, so his 3 friends come, so this is one of his first friends that we're going to read about in a minute. They come kind of trying to rationalize, trying to figure out, trying to kind of put it together why these things were happening, because surely these things don't happen for no reason. There was a reason why all these things happen. After his first friend tries to justify why this was happening, Job essentially responds and wrestles with the different questions at different points that he brings up. And he's wrestling with God as well. So let's read Job 6, verse 24 first. And he says, like, you're kind of almost coming down to this breaking point with God. And like, teach me and I'll be quiet. Teach me and I'll keep quiet. Show me why I've done wrong. Look at me. Why would I lie to your face? Stop assuming my guilt, for I have done nothing wrong. Do you think I'm lying? Don't you know the difference? Don't I know the difference between right and wrong? And you can kind of see this wrestling is like, what have I done wrong? At this point, he still hasn't cursed God. He's just trying to figure out why these things are happening in his life. And then we skip down to verse... And we skip down towards the end of the verse, verse 28 of chapter 6, where he talks about But now be so kind as to look at me without lie to your face. Relent, do not be unjust. Consider my integrity is at stake. Is there any wickedness on my lips? Can my mouth discern malice? And I think I find it quite fascinating. I think a couple of years ago I kind of went through a phase where I kind of had to kind of go back to the basics. It's like, God, why is all these things happening in my life? And I'm sure you've had times in your life where you kind of began to wrestle with, okay, God, what have I done wrong? Or why is these things happening to my life? And I think some of us can maybe relate to Job sort of wrestling with God, like, because, it's a pretty reasonable thing to think that, he doesn't really deserve these things. Sorry, too much. So then we skip down to chapter 7. We're going to get to some of the good things. I kind of wanted just to give you an overview of what's happening right now. So chapter 7, verse 20 and 21. If I have sinned, what have I done to you? You who see everything we do, why have you made me your target? Why have I become a burden to you? Why do you not pardon my offenses and forgive my sins? For I will soon lie down in my dust, for you will search for me and I will be no more. I think when you read these things, a lot of us, can relate to some extent why, this is happening to him. What has he done? And essentially what happens in the next few chapters is the rest of his friends come kind of bringing different perspectives and different point of views as to why these things are perhaps happening in his life. And essentially just a back and forth between Job and his friends and God. And his other friends were Bildad and Zophar. And I strongly recommend you guys going through this book, as to why, some of these things were happening to me. And finally, God responds, which in my mind, I was like, okay, finally, after like 38 chapters or 37 chapters, God finally has a response to Job. And we read it in Job 38. Between Job 38 to chapter 38 and 41, God kind of gives a very thorough response to this. And we read first one in 38, verse 1 to 9. Then the Lord answered Job from the whirlwind, who is this that questions my wisdom with such ignorant words? Brace yourself like a man, because I have some questions for you, and you must answer them. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you know so much. Who determined its dimension and stretched out the surveying lines? What supports its foundation, and who lays out its cornerstone? As the morning stars sang together, and the angels shouted for joy, who kept the sea inside its boundary as it burst from the womb? And as I clothed it with clouds and wrapped it in thick darkness. And I think essentially what we kind of read, and God kind of goes on until the end of the chapter, is a very long, thorough response. God kind of goes, like like the very most random details that are kind of unnecessary and a bit irrelevant to life. Oh, who, invented, crows, whatever. What, do you know how they came to be, or stuff like that? It's just very random things that God kind of brings up. He's like, do you understand how this worked? Do you understand how this came to be? Like this world that you live in, you claim to understand me, but do you understand, the things around you, the very basic concepts I put around you? And God is essentially saying, to Job that, if you can't fathom the mysteries of this natural world, how then do you expect to understand the mysteries of eternal things? I think a lot of the times, Job and his friends, thought that they knew enough about the natural world to sort of reason and interpret God's motive and God's heart. And I think a lot of the times, I think at least for myself, I can kind of have that same mindset that, like we humans, we've developed so quickly, we're advancing so quickly, everything is like, this is like the generation of knowledge and information, so we have so much of it. Therefore, we can almost try and interpret God and make sense of him. And God is essentially saying, you can't make sense of me because I'm eternal. You need eternal perspective to understand my eternal things. And I think for me, that's a pretty humbling thing to hear. It's like, after you put all the suffering in my life, you just essentially come to my life and say, do you know who I am? Do you know who you're talking to, essentially? And then, Job, in Job 6, you don't have to turn there. Job believed that only if God explained why these things were happening, only then I would understand, and only then I could have peace if you come and explain to me why you inflicted these sufferings in my life. I think when we think about the idea of being devoted to God, I don't think we often comprehend Who is it that we are devoting ourselves to? We often simplify God and downsize God to something that is manageable and something that we can attain and something that we can kind of keep within these boundaries. And I think for me, at least, before moving to, well, even while I was here in Central and throughout my whole Christian walk, it's like I subconsciously, I kind of walked my Christian life kind of thinking that God is something I can manage and something that I can kind of keep as my, I just bring him on when I need help, or I sub him on in the desperate times in life. But I think God is essentially explaining to Job is that I'm not something you can manage. I'm not something you can simply just make sense of. And then the response of God continues in chapter 41, and he says, "Then the Lord said to Job, 'Do you still want to argue with the Almighty? You are God's critic, but do you have the answers?' Job responds to the Lord. Then Job replied to the Lord, 'I am nothing. How can I ever find the answers? I will cover my mouth with my hands. I have said too much already. I have nothing more to say.' Then the Lord answered Job from the whirlwind, 'Brace yourself like a man, because I have some questions for you, and you must answer them.'" Like, God is like a proper macho man. He's like, brace yourself like a man. I can almost feel this fear, like hearing God's voice, and brace yourself. Like, I'm about to show you, I'm about to tell you even more things. And God kind of goes on again, but I'm only picking out these verses. Verse 8 reads, "Will you discredit my justice and condemn me just to prove you're right? Are you as strong as God? Can you thunder with a voice like his? All right, put your glory and splendor and your honor and majesty. Give vent to your anger, let it overflow against the proud. Humiliate the proud with a glance. Walk in the wicked where they stand. Bury them in the dust, imprison them in the world of the dead. Then even I would praise you, for your own strength would save you." And that is pretty intense. God is just basically saying, you have no idea who I am. You have no idea how grand and how big and how complex I am. You in your natural world that I've created, you kind of come to this assumption that you can explain me. And I think even for those that perhaps don't have faith and don't have any belief in God, I think a lot of times we can kind of walk through life thinking that, God is something that, it's like my science textbook. If I add 2 + 2, then equals God. Like, God is so much more complex than our minds could ever understand. And I think, in order for us to begin to, walk a life of devotion to God, we first need to understand who God is. We first need to discover who he really is in the Bible. And I think a lot of times we don't like it because it's something that we can't manage. God is not something that we can tone down or tone up or maybe adjust to our personality. And I think that's something that I think is quite prevalent in today's society, kind of adjusting who you are so you kind of fit into different things, or toning down how you are so you can kind of relate to different characters. God is not like that. God is constant throughout history. He's always been the same God. And I think that's the first step we need to kind of come to if we want to understand who God truly is. In Proverbs 9, verse 10, he talks about, the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. Like, I think we just hear that, it's like, oh yes, that's a good scripture. No, the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. When we truly understand that this God not only made this earth, but the galaxies and the systems around it, that we can't even begin to comprehend all of it, then we truly understand how little we are in comparison to God. Then we can truly come before him with complete humility. I think, for us to understand eternal things, we need eternal perspectives. So what do we conclude? And I think a lot of times, maybe when people read the book of Job, the conclusions that they might kind of come to is that, it was a pointless exercise. God, you could have literally just told this to Job and skip all the suffering part. Like, what's the point? Why did you do all of this? Job suffered for no reason. God makes no sense, which I would understand. I think a lot of times I get to that conclusion, that God, this makes no sense. I have no idea why you let things happen. And the last one, God is a maniac. Don't say that too loud. God is not a maniac. But I think, in our minds, I think a lot of times we can kind of come to that conclusion that, God is crazy. I don't understand why certain things happen. The God of the Bible is no small concept. You can manage. His splendor is beyond what we could ever understand and process. And essentially what we learned that God is saying is that to Job is that, my power is sovereign. God demonstrates his absolute power over creation. Even Satan, he does nothing without God giving him the permission to do so. This book shows that, God uses his power. God uses his power for purposes far greater than any of us could understand. God uses his might to do things that we can't even begin to explain or understand. There was this book that I was going through this year, and I feel like it was appropriate. I feel like it's called Crazy Love by Francis Chan. And essentially, the outline of this book, it kind of starts with this idea, kind of painting a picture of God first, because his commentary on the book essentially is saying is that a lot of times when we open our Bibles to read it, we kind of think it's just a religious book that we're reading that was made by, by Steve down the road. Like, this is not a book that was just written by any person or by any regular means. This is the words of the Almighty. And I think a lot of times when we come to the Bible, we kind of need to change it and shift our perspective to understand that, we're reading the words of the Almighty. And essentially, he gave this analogy that, life is almost like a long movie. It's like a 3-hour movie. Let's say, for example, 3-hour movie is eternity. And essentially, your role in it is like 1/10 of a second. And then what you do is you go home, you tell your family, oh, they made this movie about me, like I'm the main star, like my name is on it, I'm the main person. And then you go and watch the film, you'd be like, where are you? Where are you in this film? So, oh, did you not see me? I was just there like for a brief second. Did you not see me? I think a lot of times that's the mindset that we can kind of have when it comes to our devotion to God. We can make it about ourselves, and we can make it about our needs and our wants, and, oh, God, this doesn't suit me, so I don't want this. Oh, God, this is uncomfortable, so I don't really want to deal with that right now. And it kind of made me think about this video from one of my favorite TV shows. I hope the audio works.
No, this whole thing, all of this, it's all about me.
And I think a lot of times that's pretty much how we can actually view our devotion to God. It's like, oh, this is all about me. My devotion to God, me being a Christian, I'm sacrificing so much for God. Sometimes I get scared, so I kind of put my fear away so I can do this for God. I reach out to that person for God. Or I look at read my Bible for God. I mean, for yourself, sorry. Like, you make it so much about, oh, it's me. I'm the center of the attention. And I think as we read through the book of Job, we understand that God essentially says to Job, it's like, it's not about you. It's not about your perspective and what you understand and what you don't understand. It's about what I understand and what I see as a bigger picture. And I think a lot of times we kind of need that humility when we come to God. When you begin to discover who God is, when you begin to realize that your life and all that, and that all of creation exists simply for God's glory and purpose. When you grasp that concept, and when you understand that, you realize that, when you understand that, everything that exists in life is simply for God's purpose and God's glory. When you finally grasp that, you begin to find a joy and a satisfaction that you've never known before, because, that's what you were created. You're created for something much bigger and much greater than yourself. Not your purpose working out, but God's glory being known for everyone. So that's essentially all we're here for. And I think it's a very humbling position. And some of us, that perhaps doesn't sit well with us, because you're like, that sounds a bit unjust. That means God can do anything. Yes, he can do anything, because he's God and he understands eternity, because we don't understand eternity. And I think a lot of times when we think about our devotion to God, we need to discover who he is first before we kind of put this title of, oh, I'm devoted to God, I'm someone who loves God. That's why you were created. You were created to live a life of devotion to God. Living a life of devotion to God and his way is something that we all need to constantly wrestle with. Job did it for 37 chapters, and his friends, trying to understand God, but not once he cursed God. Not once he turned his back on God. And I think a lot of times, at least for myself being at uni, there's a lot of times where I felt like I gave up way too quickly. And I think some of you guys know I studied architecture and I graduated last year. And there has been some late nights that I'm like, God, why on earth did you let me do this degree? Or like, I'm struggling to manage my spiritual walk, but then at the same time, I'm struggling to do well academically. There's just too many things happening. And there's times where I thought, you know what? I feel like if I kind of drop God, I have more time to actually think about my work. If I drop God, if I don't go to midweek on Wednesdays, that's more time for me to focus on my work. If I quit my socials on Fridays, more time for God. Sundays, I can rest. Like, I don't have to do anything. I can just spend the day for myself. And there's been many times where that has sort of run through my mind, is that, you know, life would be a lot easier if God wasn't in the picture. And I think, I mean, if you do that, you'll find out that it's not. Life is not better, so please don't do it. Stick to God. But, you know, I think, you know, even as we observe through the Psalms, like David sort of wrestling to God, I think I love reading the Psalms. I think that's been one of the greatest things about this year. It's like just reading the Psalms and seeing like an example of someone, you know, wrestling with God in prayer, knowing that, actually, I'll just show you the Psalms. This is Psalms 22 that he reads, my God, why have you abandoned me? Why are you so far away when I groan for help? Every day I call for you, my God, but you do not answer. Every night I lift my voice, but I find no relief. Yet you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel. Our ancestors trusted in you, and you rescued them. They cried out to you, and they were saved. They trusted in you, and you never disgraced them. And I think this is just one example. Like when you read other Psalms, you see David almost begging God, he's like, why have you left me? I feel completely abandoned. And I think a lot of the times we need to learn to wrestle with God. We need to learn to persevere in that. As we, you know, observe the example of Job, 38 chapters, this guy was just wrestling with God. God, why have you done this to me? Like, am I innocent? Have I done something to you? Have I wronged you? Help me, God, understand. And I think a lot of the times that's the mindset we need to kind of take to our devotion to God, you know. For us to begin to live a life that is truly devoted to God, we need to grasp first who God is. And then Job learned that, and his response is something that I aim to imitate. I mean, I don't do it so well, but I aim to imitate it on a day-to-day basis, which leads me to my second point, which is discovering yourself. And I think after kind of discovering who God is, that kind of gives you a bit more perspective. It's like, okay, I can maybe kind of find myself in this new picture. You know, I think learning who God is only has one simple response, and that is one of humility and one of readiness to change. So this is like Job's response. Oh no, this is not it. Oh, I didn't put the scripture. So if you want to turn to Job 42, we have two more scriptures, this and the next one, and then I'll let you guys go. Don't worry. So Job 42, this is Job's response after essentially God goes on this rant telling him, you have no clue, you have no idea. And then Job replied to the Lord, I know that you can do all things. No purpose of yours can be thwarted. You ask, who is this that obscures my plan without knowledge? Surely I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. You said, listen now, and I will speak. I will question you, and you shall answer me. My ears had heard you, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. Like, that is a pretty crazy and humbling ending for someone that was kind of described as upright and had all these awful things happen to him, kind of coming to God again with this posture of humility in his heart. Essentially, that is the example for us as disciples. And for those of you guys perhaps that are not disciples or don't believe in the Bible or have questions about the Bible, it's a calling that perhaps you need to wrestle with some of these things, question it, test it. And I think for me, like kind of being in Finland and being in a country where people are very like kind of off, like it's something that has almost pushed me to wrestle with my faith even more. You know, people questioning all the time, oh, why do you believe in this? Oh, these documents were just written by random people here and there. I have to go back and wrestle with these things. I don't have all the answers. But God essentially is asking us to learn to wrestle with him and with his nature. He's a lot more complicated than any of us could understand. And the only way that we can sort of begin to make that first step is learning to wrestle with him through prayer, through discussions, through many other ways. That's the first step. You know, Job's response and Job's example of devotion to God is something that we should all follow. Job's response was one of humility, understood who he was and who God is. He saw himself in a new light after God explained to him, this is who I am. And he humbled himself. And I think for me, kind of going back again to this book, Crazy Love, like there's a lot of things that I kind of took away from it that, well, one of them was that I didn't think I actually loved God the way he deserved to be loved. I didn't love God. I didn't treat him with my lifestyle the way that he ought to be treated. And I think after Francis Chan kind of described the beginning of this book, this picture of God, he kind of goes on to say that a lot of times Christians, we don't have this mindset when it comes to God. We don't have this posture of humility and of gratitude when we come to God. We come with the sense of entitlement. It's like, oh God, like I've done this week, therefore you should come and fulfill all my wishes. And I think one thing I kind of had to go back to was this idea of praying and begging God. Because I feel like, as great as the group is, as I talked about earlier, I think there's been many challenges that tested my faith, and I felt not equipped enough to actually deal with a lot of the things that were happening in the ministry. Because it's been a church that's been for 20 years, no discipleship, so it's very difficult to kind of instill that culture. And in my mind, I was like, this is too much for me. I feel like I'm wrestling with my relationship with God. How on earth am I supposed to help anyone else in their walk with God let alone 8 people? This is too much. God, I can't do this. Like, I have no idea. And so essentially what I started this like 4-week prayer. And I was like, you know what, God, I'm going to test this out. I'm going to test you to see if you really would answer my prayers. So every single day I had like this was specific people. I prayed, oh God, pray for X person. I really want to pray that their faith can be shown through how they interact in their school and how they reach out to their friends. Anyway, I prayed like very detailed, specific prayers to God. Every day I was like, oh man, 10 days. God, nothing still happened. I'm still here. I'm still trying to figure out whether or not this works. Until this day, I look back at that list and I look back at the people that I prayed for. Like, it's crazy. Finnish people are very shy. They don't talk at all. And then there was this girl in particular, Laura. I think, I can't go back to the slides too far. Anyway, this girl, Laura, she's so shy. She can barely say anything. She can say, but she would barely speak. She's very happy in her comfort of the silence. She has been one of the girls that's been bringing the most visitors. And I've been praying for that specifically, that Laura would come out a bit more of her shell. And it's been such an inspiration for me. I'm like, God, I didn't do anything. I feel like she's just bringing visitors every single week, bringing in new friends and bringing in new people to question God and to learn about God and to wrestle with different things. And there's other things for my life personally as well that I prayed for. I'm like, God, I have no idea how some of these things came to be. And I think a lot of the time just kind of going back to the basics and going back to prayer, fasting and reading, kind of going back to those basics and treating them as, this is the foundation. If I want to be closer to God, if I want to be more devoted to God, if I actually want to live a life of devotion to God, I need to go back to these basics. And I need to go back to it with a posture of humility, that I don't have the answers, I don't have all the plans and all the things. There's one last scripture in Romans 12. This is a scripture that I feel like I've been meditating on it a lot throughout this year, and you might have read it before. Romans 12 verse 1, it reads, "Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. By the grace given to me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourselves with sober judgment in accordance with the faith God has distributed to each of you." And I think I kind of go back to this idea of like constant renewal and constant changing and constant being molded and remolded into something new every day for God. If I was to leave you with anything today, that it would be that idea of like constant renewal and constant molding and remolding, because your faith there isn't an end to it. The end is when you die. The end is when you're reunited with Christ. So kind of taking this mindset of every day constantly devoting yourself to God in humility, in willingness and openness to be broken and to be remolded and to be molded again and to be remolded and to be renewed, as the scripture talks about. That is the core foundation of being devoted to God. Is this idea of like just being flexible. That's essentially who you are. Someone that ought to be flexible so God can do great things. You know, devotion to God is constantly discovering who God is and renewing who we are in him. You know, our view of God shapes our devotion to him. If you don't view God the right way, if we don't have the right posture towards God, that affects our devotion to him, that affects our day-to-day walk with him. And I just wanted to leave you with these reflection questions. I know they're quite basic questions, but I think they're questions that, you know, I think of quite often. You know, what is your view of God? You know, how do you see God in your life? And how can you better devote yourself to God? And I think each of you know that personally for your life, that you know things that, oh, you know what, I'm not reading enough of my Bible. You know what, I'm not praying enough. I'm not spending enough time with God. Wherever that might be, it's up to you to sort of figure out and wrestle with those things. But yeah, I just wanted to leave you with that today. Thank you so much, guys.